All right, I'm sure we'll get a few more attendees, but good morning, good afternoon. This is Joe Morin, CEO, founder, CyFlare. And today I have Brian Stoner from Stellar Cyber, and he's going to take us through, give us a little insight into Stellar, which is the core platform underneath the breach detection service many of you know about. But I wanted to take a few minutes and just start to get the vendor and the partner ecosystem around CyFlare just a little bit tighter. I think, many of you guys have talked to us a lot, right? Been years with some of you, a dozen or more clients together, and you have some good insight into the platform. Some of you are still new to CyFlare. So I really wanted to take some time and get you guys closer to Stellar Cyber, which is really the core software product behind the SIM services that we're doing, and let you hear what's going on with Stellar, their vision, what's working, what's winning. They're crushing it right now. They're beating the big guys. They have some great wins and some key accounts, and wanted to just take some time to get you guys closer, let you hear from Brian and Stellar directly on where they're going, what's working, and just how to take things further. At CyFlare, as you guys know, we're all about transparency, and this is just one additional thing that we're doing to make sure partners feel that, and it extends to clients, and same thing with vendors. So today we have Brian Stoner. He's the VP of MSSPs with Stellar Cyber. Brian's got a ton of experience in the industry, formerly with Cylance, FireEye, Lastline, and a bunch of others. I don't want to steal Brian's thunder here, but he's going to take us through a few slides. I think it's good to set the tone on just what's going on in the industry, so that the terms, resonate with you guys and you're familiar. But I think as we go through that, he's going to talk a lot about this new category, which is XDR, right? SIM is the old stuff, XDR is the new way. And CyFlare, coupled with that, is extremely complementary, right? We're building an open SOC as a service platform, right? Every client we can get started with now, does not matter what they have deployed today. And between what we're building in our open platform, as well as the Stellar XDR platform, it means that we could drop into any client on any given day. Yes is the answer to ingesting data. Yes is the answer to automation, and yes is the answer to SOC adding value. So, just a couple of key points here. But with that said, happy to introduce Brian, and feel free to take it away. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joe. Really appreciate the opportunity. Hey, everybody. I'm Brian Stoner. I'm a 15-year veteran of the cybersecurity space, and prior to that, I was actually working for a lot of different carriers as well. And so spent a lot of time both, on the direct side selling, just like you guys. And, in most of my cybersecurity positions, I've been fortunate to work with the channel. And so I've worked with resellers, global consulting firms, regional consulting firms, but really my passion is for managed security services providers. And I think that goes back to one of my first jobs in the telecom business for a small company called Centex Telemanagement, where we were adding value by combining invoices and creating reports. And so as simple as those things, sound, providing that service to the customer that they need is really the key. And so when I was, looking at some additional opportunities, a board member that I was friendly with at Cylance, because I used to present to them on a monthly basis, reached out to me and said, hey, Stellar Cyber would like to, improve their go-to-market strategy with the service providers. And it was an amazing opportunity. As a matter of fact, before I even took the job, they wanted me to speak with Joe directly to make sure I was okay before they would extend me an offer letter. So I want to thank Joe for giving me the okay before they actually allowed me to start here at Stellar Cyber. So what we're going to talk about today is just a little bit deeper level conversation on the platform and what Open XDR means. So we'll go ahead and get started. If you're not familiar with Stellar Cyber, Stellar Cyber was actually founded by several individuals who were on the founding team at NetScreen several years ago, which was eventually acquired by Juniper. So we've got a very deep, pedigree of engineers on the team that have been developing, this platform for the last 5 years. And we are, in the process of working on our B round of funding this fall. But we've, received significant, funding in our A round. And, today we are over 850 customers strong between our MSSPs and our resale partners. And we, in the last year, we just did a quick study. We grew last, quarter over quarter last year, 470%. So, what we're doing is resonating extremely well with service providers and end customers because it's really providing an optimal outcome for them. And we're starting to see a lot of the different, security, award companies recognizing us and starting to know who we are, which is great. But I think more than anything, every time that we bring on a new customer, a lot of times they'll have products that maybe haven't been integrated into the platform yet. And that represents a really strong opportunity for Stellar Cyber because that's where we shine. We can add integrations to other tools within 10 days and begin to provide value and help the customer extend the investment in the tools that they've already made. The interesting thing is that there is no magic quadrant for XDR yet. There's still only a SIM magic quadrant and EDR magic quadrants and all those sorts of things. So we're going to talk a little bit about some work that we've been doing with Gartner to help define what we're doing in this market space and make it simple for you and your prospects to understand. So let's start there. Having come from Cylance, I was very familiar with the endpoint security space. As a matter of fact, while I was at FireEye, they developed an endpoint security product called HX. And then, prior to that, I was at McAfee even before they got acquired by Intel and was familiar with their different endpoint technologies. And what's interesting about endpoint technologies is that a lot of the older AV products are right now being replaced with next generation machine learning based endpoint products, which is great, but it's a different tool to manage. And so what's been happening is the customers are glad that they don't have to do DAT file updates anymore on their endpoint technology. The maintenance on these things is a lot less, but you do have to tune these next generation tools a little bit differently. And in order to do that, a lot of the endpoint security providers started offering EDR services, which are great, but they're kind of seeing right now a commoditization in their space as manufacturers like CrowdStrike and SentinelOne are growing fairly quickly. Symantec and McAfee and Sophos and Trend Micro are all kind of contracting right now. So there is a shift happening. And with that shift, they've been offering a lot of these, managed EDR services. When we look at that compared to the broader market of managed services providers, a lot of managed services providers have always offered firewall management and monitoring, as well as things like email management and monitoring. And a lot of the MSPs will do, cloud backup and things like that. But I think what's interesting about this and what Gartner really helped us understand is that as the market is evolving, especially with COVID, the users are no longer sitting behind the firewall, which is kind of like the moat around the castle, right? So as these users go outside of that corporate environment, and they're working from home on a cable modem or a DSL line, they're accessing, public cloud. Maybe the customer has moved their core business applications from running in their data center to running up in AWS or Azure or Google, right? And they're using more and more SaaS services. Salesforce.com really kind of started that big trend, and now we're seeing more and more SaaS services being consumed by our customers. And all of that represents an opportunity for us to educate our customers that traditional security, it needs to be extended to cover all of these new areas. And one great way to do that is with what we're calling extended detection and response. So what extended detection and response, the primary tenet there is, instead of just monitoring the little things that are in the office, we need to expand that aperture and monitor all the services that the customers are using. So I'll pause there for a second and see, does anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts, on this positioning within the marketplace?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And to all attendees, the mics are muted, but if you want to use the Q&A feature or chat, please feel free to post there. And Brian, as soon as something does pop in, I'll let you know as we go here. But I think one question to kind of seed on this front, and we hear this a lot from clients and partners, is there's confusion around EDR, SIM, and XDR, right? A lot of times we hear EDR, a common question is Sophos EDR, right? How is it different than Stellar Cyber, right? And some of the obvious things are with, prevention and that sort of thing. But I think there's definitely confusion out in the marketplace around SIM, XDR, and how it competes, with endpoint and EDR capabilities.
Yeah, well, maybe just to put a finer tip on that, and having been at Silence, right? There's endpoint protection products, which are designed to stop the bad things from happening before it gets to the EDR stage. And so I would classify those endpoint protection products in a couple different categories. One is kind of next gen, which is using machine learning to determine if things are bad before they load on the machine. And the other is the AV products, right? And as the industry evolved, 5 years ago, the AV providers were laughing at the next gen, providers and saying, hey, that's never going to work. Well, within 2 years, it kind of flip-flopped and everybody wanted the next gen products. But what they did was they shifted the conversation to EDR. EDR is essentially designed to just catch everything that the endpoint protection product misses. And AV products miss a lot because the threats are expanding faster than they can create signatures. And they can only put so many signatures in their protection product before it causes, a performance impact for the customer, right? So what they did is they shifted the conversation to EDR to say, well, no product can catch everything. So if you have EDR, at least, we can catch it, right? And then they're selling that service, right? At that point, most of those EDR providers are trying to integrate with the customer's existing SIM. And SIM technology has been around for a long time, but the primary difference between SIM and XDR is that with the SIM, it's all rules-based, right? So a SIM doesn't really know anything until you give it a rule for something to look for. And the approach with the SIM is we'll bring in all the logs, right? We'll write some rules, and when something breaks that rule, then we'll have an alert, right? The other thing that they did was they made the SIM really good at reporting for compliance and things like that. So a lot of the different compliance that's been written for PCI and HIPAA and GLB, right, is around log retention and log storage. But the problem with that strategy is that it generates a ton of extra storage. You don't really need probably 80% of what's in a traditional log, because you can actually pull the metadata out and store that and use that instead, because that's normally what you're using. But at the end of the day, I think the primary difference is that, from an XDR perspective, instead of leveraging rules, which it either is or it isn't, right? In one company's network, 10 login failures could be, a massive security breach. In a Fortune 500 company, that could be normal in the last 10 minutes, right? So a rule has to be created and adjusted constantly to give the SIM any level of efficacy. But what we're doing, with XDR, especially with the Stellar platform, is we're leveraging machine learning for what it's built for, which is looking for variations in normal activity in that customer's network. So now, instead of us saying, while there were more than 10 login failures, we're giving you an event, we'll say, hey, we saw some highly anomalous behavior and it resulted in 230 login failures on this machine in the last 3 minutes. It's much more specific and it's much more easier for the SOC to respond to. So I think, at a basic level, those are kind of the big differences. Does that make sense, Joe, or did I miss anything?
Yeah, no, I think that helps. There's a lot within that, but it definitely helps. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to the next slide. So one of the other, key features of the platform, and Joe mentioned this when he opened up the session, is XDR is great, right? But everybody's going to be talking about XDR right now. All of the EDR providers that I've just mentioned are all developing XDR because their EDR services are, very quickly becoming commoditized. So they have to keep adding services to make sure that they can make money. And so the other thing that you'll see is other manufacturers, let's say Palo Alto or maybe Fortinet, right? You can get XDR, but it only works on technologies that you purchase from them. And we feel like that just doesn't add the value, right, that needs to be added to what your customers need, which is an open platform where we can use whatever your customer has when we, first engage with them. We can monitor it over time. And then if there's a better solution for that customer, you can recommend it and they can implement it. And we can still provide the same high level of detections and service, that they come to expect from, a fully integrated, single stack versus more of a defense in depth strategy where you can choose the tools that fit your environment the best. So, we came up with Relief to help you guys remember this when you're, sitting down with a customer, right? So the first part of Relief is retaining that investment in the tools and the people, right? If the customer has tools in their environment, they've probably been trained on them and they know how to, use them. So if you ask them to rip and replace something, they know that they're going to have to retrain people. The second thing is we can enhance what they have with additional detections, correlations, and automation. So, in the example that I gave where the customer user is no longer, behind the firewall, if they're working from home and, they get compromised from a phishing email and the EDR sees the lateral movement inside their machine, but the next thing you know, the attacker is trying to dump their customer database from Salesforce using that user's credentials. The EDR is not going to see that, right? But if we're connected into Salesforce and we see that login and we connect it, via machine learning with the breach on the user's endpoint, now we have a full picture of an event, right? And that correlation is what takes threat hunting teams and incident response teams days and weeks to even make those connections. But we're doing it here with technology. So when you're sharing this with a customer, this is the state-of-the-art platform that is doing things at a higher level than is available anywhere else. You can also leverage all of the data that they have. We can pull in historical logs, and we can pull in logs from any device that they have. to correlate this data. Sometimes with a SIM or another, scanning tool or another platform, it may not integrate with something else, and it might just be too much of a pain to do it. So they do what we call swivel chair integrations, where they look from one console to the other and try to make sense of things, right? The interflow process that we do eliminates the swivel chair integrations, and I'll talk about that a little bit deeper level in a few minutes. It also helps you, maintain your independence. If the customer, hears about another tool and thinks that it would be good for their environment, you can research it for them. And if it makes sense to make that switch, they can do it without having to, create a new integration into another SIM or another platform. We just ingest the logs and do what we do. You can also extend this to meet your customers' needs through customization. And this is a really important point, because this is where Stellar Cyber plus CyFlare, 1 + 1 = 6, right? Our technology is one of the only platforms where the SOC can actually influence the machine learning models in the tool. So not only is our machine learning, generating baselines on your customer's activity on a regular basis, but Joe's team can actually go in and influence those models. Let's say, we score something low because, we don't think it's that big of a deal for that, for a regular environment, but Joe says, hey, you know what? No, that's a super high risk situation in this particular environment. He can influence the machine learning model, and we'll learn that, and we'll give it a higher score next time. So, there's other examples of how that machine learning can be, influenced, but, that's a really, really key point. Joe's team knows how the attackers are changing their tactics. We're creating new detections on a, monthly basis through our data scientists to do the same thing. But there's no substitute for a good practitioner who's behind the console, doing threat hunting and other things in the platform. And then at the end of the day, right, this focus, really builds a differentiation, right? Because now, from like a machine learning IDS example, right? In a SIM, you would see millions of alerts in a month, on an IDS system. With our machine learning, we can baseline what's normal and, maybe reduce that million alerts down to 2 that are critical. So what that really does is it, gives your customer a sense that the technology is providing significant value, and it's helping Joe's team be more efficient and more effective and focusing on the things that matter faster. So I'll pause for a second there and see if anybody has any questions.
Thanks, Brian. I don't see any open questions as of now, but to those who are attending, feel free, ask away. We've got Brian here, so we might as well use it. Yeah. But I think you bring up a good point with curation, right? So XDR, the fact that it's we have the ability to kind of bring your own application, right? It's not just about set plugins and parsers. A lot of our clients, even with some of the partners I see here on the call, we have mutual clients where the client has built their own app, right? And they generate events to a log file. We ingest that. We've created automated threat hunting rules, and you can actually, manipulate the system in such a way and interact with machine learning pieces where you can tune that. There's no other platform where you can do that. So, it's just a simple use case, but very powerful. Good point.
Yeah, it creates a ton of value, Joe, for sure. All right. So next, I'm going to talk about interflow for a minute. Hopefully, you guys have heard the term before. This is our proprietary approach to solving one of the biggest challenges in the security business, and that challenge is, if you're just bringing in raw logs from multiple different sources, you're naturally going to have blind spots between those tools because they're only focused in the area where they provide their solution. Okay. This is a really, really critical concept. And so rather than, blindly pulling in logs and then trying to do machine learning across a bunch of data that really isn't security specific, what we do is we actually look at those different logs, and we have sophisticated filtering built in that Joe's team actually tunes in this process as well. But what we do is, instead of just ingesting all those raw logs, we pull the metadata out of those logs. And we do that at the sensor at the customer site. And what we're doing there is both filtering out things that we don't need, but making sure that we pull out the critical information from all the different tools. When we take that information back to our core data analyzer, which is kind of the part of the product that takes a look at everything and does the machine learning and the detections and all that, it actually looks at all of the different things that are in those metadata files to look for files. They look for IP addresses, URLs, things that would have a reputation. And so when we look at those things, we actually have 15 different sources of threat intelligence already integrated into the platform. 15 is not a magic number for any particular reason, but it does give us a very good indicator of whether or not something is a known bad thing at that point, right? And so we actually add that information to the metadata and create the interflow record that gets stored, in the data lake of the product. Okay. Once it's in the data lake, then we can write any detection that we want to go out and look for techniques, tactics, and protocols that the attackers use to compromise your customers. And that's, this is a really important concept, because to do this, without the interflow process, you would be writing custom algorithms for different combinations of tools and other things that just really don't scale. The other thing is that the platform has great capabilities in order to store just the security events for a longer period of time, because they don't take up much storage. And that gives Joe's team a wider aperture when they're doing threat hunting and things like that, to look for things that may have been happening over a longer period of time. But then also, in the platform, we give Joe's team the ability to archive off, anything maybe past 90 days that, we can always pull it back in for forensics purposes. But this way we keep the data lake a manageable size, and we can create more and more detections. Joe's team can create more and more automated threat hunting rules that are going to find things that are even in the blind spot between the tools of what the customer might be experiencing today. So this is a really
Brian.
Yeah,
thanks for covering that. So a couple of key points in terms of how it's used and how do we speak to it. One of the absolute key differentiators with this platform is that because of interflow and how lightweight it is a full packet recorder, right? So when we drop the appliance with the network sensor, as Stellar calls it, on the network, we are capturing basically metadata around every single packet, right? Someone initiated the payload, the session duration, all of that. All of the other solutions, SIM solutions in particular, the big guys, the Splunk, the Logarithm, Alien Vault, etc. What they do is effectively, if there's not an immediate correlation around a security event, that traffic is gone. Yes, the network sensors see it, but they only retain it if it's related to a security event, right? The problem is that's great if you know everything at that point in time, right? But if you don't, and you need to come back to something in a couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months, and it was not known that it was a threat, and there's related activities, etc., that are anomalous or malicious, you actually have that forensic capability. So for us, by default, we store every single packet for view, for search for 30 days. Every security event is within your active UI and your client's UI for a year, right? And to Brian's point, that where this gets different is all the other platforms, especially if it's a cloud SIEM, cloud hosted SaaS type offering, they will let you request logs. You can go back to a year, but guess what? You're in CSV jail, right? Enjoy your millions of rows. That is where you live. I hope you're good at pivot tables. In this world, request the data set from the SOC, we re-import, and you can visualize that. And the SOC can assist with it too. So a couple of key things where this really is apples and oranges. Full packet recorder, the ability to import it and export at will. Super powerful, and it's just, it's a capability all on its own.
Yeah, thanks.
I get fired up. Go ahead, Brian.
I'm glad I'm touching some good nerves. I think hopefully the audience is feeling the energy here. So one of the things that I wanted to cover today was, some of the recent events that we've all been seeing in the news. Obviously, we saw, the Microsoft Exchange server event the last couple of weeks. Prior to that, we saw the SolarWinds Sunburst attack. And the reason I wanted to bring these up is to share with you guys that all of the techniques that happened in these attacks, for even like FireEye Mandiant, it took them about a week and a half, 2 weeks to release their full report after they notified that they had a situation, right? And the reason that it took that long is that they had to do what Joe said and go through all those CSV files to figure out what happened. The difference with Stellar is that in all of these examples, the behaviors that happen within the attack are easily identifiable by the Stellar Cyber platform. So what we're looking at on this particular screen is an actual SolarWinds server that downloaded the update from the actual SolarWinds website, which is on the left side. And as soon as that happened, we saw multiple compromises on 4 different servers within hours. Remote monitoring and management tool could have a similar attack happen. The only reason, Joe, do I have you? My screen just said my internet connection was unstable.
You blipped for a second, but we have you back.
Okay. So what I was saying is, all of these techniques were detected by the platform out of the box without analysts having to figure it out. All of these things come out of the box. So what this does is it reduces the amount of time that, we have to detect something new, because we know that all of these behaviors are bad in the first place. The second point to this is that, and I was saying this about RMM tools, this happened to ConnectWise and Kaseya and Datto a year before it happened to SolarWinds. The only difference, and the reason that this, made it to such a big, noise level, was because SolarWinds happened to do business with the government. All those other RMM providers were compromised in the last year or so, and it didn't really hit the radar. But why would they go after the remote monitoring and management tool, right? It's really, really simple. If you can get into that tool with administrator credentials, you have a roadmap to how to compromise every single device that is managed by that application. So the attackers knew if they got at the MSSP and were able to compromise their RMM tool, they had the keys to the kingdom and the treasure map to the release level of every server in their network. And they knew exactly what exploits would work on those machines, right? So this is the easy button for the bad guys. The other thing that I want to point out is that traditional attacks are very similar, except for the fact that instead of, calling it supply chain and, knowing that the actual update had been compromised, here they're using other ways to compromise one device inside of the network so they can pivot and move laterally, right? It could be a brute force attack where we see lots of login failures. It could be a phishing attack where somebody clicks on an email, their machine gets compromised, and it starts scanning for other machines in the network, doing downloads, exploiting them, creating outbound tunnels, and then exfiltrating the data. So this is a pattern that you will see in all of the different attacks. But what's great about the Stellar platform is we see every single behavior, right? If you were to look at this on a SIM, you would see probably 10,000 events hitting all these different IP addresses, all these different events, and it wouldn't give the kind of complete picture of what's happening. So again, this is one of the key features of the platform is the ability to build these correlations and to really simplify for the customer and for the partner, what's happening here. And that gives you the much faster path toward, remediation. Anything you want to add to this, Joe?
No, I think this is key, right? Just, the Verizon report last year indicated that 96% of major breaches had 3 or less indicators of compromise. The net of that, especially as a 24/7 SOC, MSSP, partnering with our partners and associating with clients, it's got the platform has to be super smart. And seeing every little one single thing is super important, but stitching together the story, especially if there's an outbreak and widespread, I think that's super important. So that's the only thing I'd add there.
All right. This slide I want to talk about because we actually have Joe's quote in the build, but this is something that you can think about when you're talking with your customers and your prospects who might not be using this service yet, is that we enhance what all of the other security tools they have in their environment do for them. And what I mean by that is, a firewall is a very purpose-built device. It's the traffic cop for the network, right? EDR is very purpose-built product for endpoints. Scanners are great for, determining where they need to focus their next patch updates and things like that. But it's much more powerful if we see events happening on those endpoints through the EDR tool that might be trying to communicate outbound through the firewall. And if we know that by discovering the application that's running on that device and the patch level through the scanner, if we know that it's vulnerable to a specific attack, we can increase the threat score immediately and raise the awareness for Joe's team that this is something that they need to focus on right away. Okay? You don't get that with a SIM. When you combine that capability with adding in all of your cloud services, your web application firewalls, it becomes very, very powerful. And I think what's really interesting and what we've been seeing over the last year or so is that even customers that have a traditional SIM, they're looking for ways to reduce the ingestion into their SIM because their SIMs were never built to intake the volume of alerts and events that today's technologies are generating. So think about that for a minute. If I had, 3 security devices, in my network when I bought my SIM, and it's 20 years later and now I have 50, right? That SIM was never designed to handle 50 security products throwing, multiple alerts at them, much less all of the rules that then you need to create and generate to make sense of those logs. So what we've seen in the last year or so, and you'll see this in some of the wins that we've had with some big customers, we actually kind of pre-filter everything and just send the events into the SIM. And the value for the customer there is they already have their workflow built with their SIM. So they have their analysts hooked into it. They have their workflow for tickets. If I can send my alerts into that ticket and then have it generate a response back to me when they close it, then that adds a lot of value to the customer, right? Splunk as a product, the licensing is 100% based on ingestion. So if we can reduce that ingestion by over 90%, and they can continue to do modeling and other things with Splunk for their marketing department and all that stuff, which a lot of these companies do, you can really give them a great opportunity to reduce their ingestion and, with higher fidelity alerts without having to program a lot of stuff within Splunk. And, the same is true for a lot of the older, Alien Vault and Logarithm and those older SIMs. Those are the tools that we're replacing at a lot of the other service providers right now. Anything to add on that one, Joe?
Well, I think the key thing here is, two key pieces, right? So number one, take the data and let the platform enrich it, right? So it sees things that the incumbent tools did not, right? A firewall does not send you an alarm for things that it does not know, right? So it's important to be extra, kind of cautious and paranoid. But further, and to add on to that, the SOC can also use this stuff for forensic capability. It's one less request of you as the partner. It's one less request of the client, and it just expedites everything end to end. So, it's a different story in terms of not just more data is better. Stellar recently added a feature so that for any given log source, we can actually filter out very specific things, and it makes the ingestion extremely something that we can curate, manipulate, and keep the storage down, keep costs down. So, a lot of features and capabilities here, but I think that's the net of why do this. It's because we want enrichment. We want the SOC to see and touch everything to expedite the whole process and alleviate the burden end to end.
Great point, Joe. Another thing to think about.
Brian, just a quick time check. We got about 15 minutes, and I know these partners want to hear how you guys are winning and selling and making money, and I want them to know that it's possible and not just a couple $1,000 deals. These are sizable, marquee, and so just heads up on that.
Yeah, well, so I'll just cover this slide really quick because what we're going to share on this slide is really simple concept, right? Leveraging the Stellar platform, where we have the machine learning based IDS built in, we have the sandbox built in, we have the threat intelligence built in, we have the automated threat hunting rules built in. All of these things can reduce the number of tools that your customer might need in their environment. We can not only replace the SIM, we can replace other things. And in smaller customers, they may have never had some of these capabilities. So it is definitely, and I've been doing this for 15 years, it's the most complete platform you can purchase for a small customer. So, the thing that we want to focus on when we're talking with a customer is not so much the bits and the bytes and, how Stellar does it, right? That's for me to share with you, right? I think the message that you're going to want to share with your customers is that, compared to a traditional technology, we can reduce the mean time detection, by over 8x. That's a big statement, but the capability to correlate things that are happening across multiple devices is what allows us to do that. And the second piece is the automation that Joe can instrument through automated threat hunting rules and response capabilities in the platform can reduce the mean time to remediation by over 20x. Again, it integrates with all the security products that a customer could potentially use, and it's application based. So it's a single pane of glass. There's no more swivel chair integrations. You get a really clean view of what's happening in the environment every day. So let's talk about some wins. Higher education is an area where we've been very successful, and as you'll see, it's a global thing for us, right? At the University of Zurich, there are over 25,000 students and 150 institutes and colleges that are associated with the university system. And they were having a big challenge managing all of that, within Splunk. Not only were they having a hard time managing all of it, but it was very difficult to manage without having the ability to create different groups within Splunk to build a multi-tenant architecture. So when they met us for the first time, that was the key feature that got them interested to take the meeting. And then when they saw how, without them having to create all these different machine learning models and connecting the data to do these detections, where it was all out of the box, and they could very easily threat hunt across all of the interflow records, that was the next thing that really got them hooked on the platform. And then, finally, they were seeing so many events from their IDS technology, network detection and response on this slide, that, again, to my point earlier, you could see 1 million events in alerts, I'll call them alerts, in a month on an IDS. Are all of those things worthy of being considered an event where you want to create a ticket around it? Absolutely not. And so leveraging our machine learning to do that was really the hook for that deal. And this was a over a $500,000 annual deal, based on the number of users, and they have multiple data processors, and it's a fairly large implementation, but very similar to the situation that we saw at the Manhattan Community College as well. Any questions on that, Joe?
No, I think the Manhattan Community College. I actually, I was interacting with those guys a couple of years ago, and they're incredibly. They got a lot of stuff going on. I think the largest community college system in the U.S. Or very close, and they've got options for every vendor. So I think that was a huge win for you guys. I think that the key point is, it scales to that level. We do have a couple of key clients ourselves within the enterprise that they love the multi-tenant capability, right? So some of these enterprises it's more of a conglomeration, right? They have child companies, sister companies, and they want that aggregate view, but the ability to break it out into autonomous, data domains for those separate companies. So it is a key use case to look for in the mid-market, the enterprise.
Yeah, and again, Joe, the key point to that is that we machine learn on each tenant, right? So if you're able to break all those different institutes into their own tenant, then we can baseline behavior for each one and see anomalies within each one, versus trying to create one across all of them, right? So it's
great point.
Much higher fidelity, right? So here's some different, enterprise wins that we've had over the last year or so. Gulfstream, obviously, they manufacture the airplanes, and they have super strict compliance requirements based on what they do. Obviously, if someone were to get in and steal the plans for an airplane, that would be really bad. So in this one, our competitors were more traditional SIMs, like Logarithm and QRadar, leveraging Micro Focus. And so, the big thing for these guys, again, was the fact that they didn't have to manage thousands of rules in order to get value out of the product, right? So better detection and response through machine learning. And then also, again, this is going to be a kind of a common thread across my examples today, but that network detection and response, being able to look at all of that network activity and narrow it down to just a few things that are critical, is a big benefit to a lot of these bigger customers. And then, threat hunting into a single multi-tenant platform, in these enterprise accounts, that really means, if they see something happening in a sister company, can they pivot quickly and look for that across their entire attack surface? And that's something that we can do very easily because, if you've been in the platform and you've seen how we break up the data lake, you can get a view of all tenants. You could get a view of a subgroup of tenants, or you can get view into a individual tenant. And it happens within seconds because the platform basically just filters and gives you what you need to see very quickly. So these are some of the key things and reasons that we've won against some traditional SIMs, especially the upkeep on a lot of those SIMs too is expensive. Anything I can add there, Joe?
No, I think was there one more win or was
one more? Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Let's hear it.
So this one is with EBSCO. And the CISO from EBSCO actually went to another partner and brought us into that partner immediately. So he evidently really liked the platform. But in this example, in these two examples, actually, we were, again, going up against the IDS as the initial project, right? They were looking for a network detection and response tool. So in these examples, they were looking at things like extra hop and dark trace and awake, right? But as we went through the sales process and shared all the other capabilities of the platform, they quickly realized that they didn't need Splunk or Sumo Logic, and that they could completely replace those with one tool. So that's how we won these two deals. And again, multi-tenancy played a big role in these wins because we were able to break those, sister companies into the 40 different divisions and give them that visibility to the critical things by machine learning on each one versus doing it across the whole group. So very similar to the other wins, but just to let you know, you can sometimes get in on a network, detection project and then pivot and grow your deal from there. So that's all I had, Joe. I would just like to say thank you so much for your partnership, for your support, for giving me the chance to present to your partners, and definitely hope we can do this again in the future.
Yeah, thanks so much for the commitment back. We've been working with Stellar since the beginning, really, for both companies. And we built some significant things here. But I think, for our partners, and by the way, this was a partner-only webinar. This is the first of many webinars we intend to do to get the vendors and the partners just talking more, right? Specific topics, solutions, issues. We're going to start fostering just a lot more of that in general. I think at CyFlare, again, we are about transparency. Right. So this is Stellar Cyber. Everyone meet Brian, and stellarcyber.ai. Reach out. Let's get the conversation started. You got questions, they got answers. We have answers. Again, there's nothing to hide, and I think more is more on that front. The key goal for me in wanting to do this webinar with all of you is the simple fact that with your clients, with your companies, your brand, their brand, but also my brand, CyFlare, there's too much to lose, right? If we can choose one thing that's bread and butter staple, embedded in the appliances that, it's just a core thing we do, it has to be great. And I believe in this platform. I think a lot of you guys have seen it in action. I want you to feel 3 inches taller in your next meeting. I want you to really trust this platform. It really is unparalleled. I just can't say that enough. We don't take it lightly. This is not the least expensive platform either. It's expensive, but we've done this in such a way that everybody on the planet can afford this. It's very consumable. We've got clients with literally 1 or 2 users. They can afford it. Therefore, everybody can, and everybody can do something with it. The other key point is XDR, right? It's ready now. It can ingest from anywhere. There's no limitations, and it's future-proof. Things change inside of organizations. People come and go. Ideas come and go. Solutions evolve. There's control gaps that need to be filled. This thing is fluid. It's meant to integrate. It's meant to automate. And the CyFlare layers, of course, we're filling in gaps with the human aspect. Top 100 global SOC 3 years running, about to be 4, and we're going to continue on with that. But I just, for all the attendees, I really want you guys to trust. Stellar is it's an ecosystem partner. Feel free to reach out, and looking forward to more conversation. It does look like we had a pretty quiet group today. No questions came in. Brian, maybe that means you nailed it and got all the everything preempted. But if you do have questions that come up after the webinar, please do reach out to us. And again, feel free to engage Stellar. But to everyone who attended, thank you so much. And Brian and Stellar team, thanks for co-hosting here and leading the way. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, we really appreciate the opportunity, and we appreciate being able to support you and all your partners. So thank you for that. And if they ever need support from us in any way, we'll always be there for you and for them.
It happens every time. We've seen it over 4 years now. So thanks all. Have a great day.
Thank you.